Buenas noches a todos. Muy buenas noches, queridos Pedro Ángel Palou y Salman Rushdie. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos y también quiero dar las gracias de manera muy especial a Seis Barral y a todo Grupo Planeta por hacer posible esta presentación. Durante estos días de feria, nuestro país invitado de honor, Reino Unido, nos ha mostrado que encarna tanto tradición como vanguardia en el mundo literario. De entre las voces británicas que nos están acompañando en la feria, nos sentimos honrados de contar con Salman Rushdie, ya que a través de 2 años, 8 meses y 28 noches, su nueva novela, nos confirma que estamos frente a uno de los grandes escritores vivos de nuestro tiempo. A Salman Rushdie le gusta que la historia y la fantasía, sus dos grandes pasiones, colisionen. Y así, empujando una contra la otra, dio vida a su nueva novela 2 años, 8 meses y 28 noches, de la que dialogará con Pedro Ángel Palou. El título de la novela es el equivalente exacto a 1001 noches, como la famosa antología de Oriente que protagoniza Sherazada, la mujer que cada noche le narraba un cuento a su amante para evitar que la matara. Esta es la segunda vez que Salman Rushdie nos hace el honor de estar en esta feria en Guadalajara. La primera ocurrió hace exactamente 20 años, en momentos muy difíciles para él, cuando por la publicación de su libro Versos satánicos, una persona insensata, el fanatismo, pusiera precio a su cabeza y tuviera que vivir por muchos años con la sombra de esa amenaza. Muchas gracias, señor Salman Rushdie, por venir a engalanar nuevamente esta feria. Muchas gracias, Pedro Ángel, por este diálogo. Sea usted siempre bienvenido en esta feria, sea siempre bienvenido en Guadalajara. Buenas noches a todos.
Muy buenas noches. Es un honor continuar teniendo a Salman Rushdie con nosotros y pudiendo ahora conversar después de esa excepcional plática que tuvimos en la apertura del Salón Literario Carlos Fuentes, en la que de alguna manera Salman Rushdie nos contó su poética actual. Presentarles ahora su más reciente novela, 2 años, 8 meses y 28 noches. Hay escritores para quienes las convenciones del realismo no operan del todo. Escritores que miran el mundo y lo que creemos inmutable, la llamada realidad, y se mofan de su porosa consistencia. En los versos satánicos, por ejemplo, un chivo emergía de un accidente aéreo y ahí apenas empezaba la cosa. Todo, a partir de ese momento, rompía las expectativas de un lector pacato y no dispuesto a suspender su incredulidad como quería Coleridge. Al morir Gabriel García Márquez, Salman Rushdie, en su obituario del New York Times, se pregunta sobre el llamado realismo mágico y piensa que el problema con la definición radica en que solo leemos el adjetivo mágico y no pensamos que se trata de una forma de narrar anclada en la otra parte del término, realismo. Esta aparente sutileza no lo es tanto, pues permite explorar sus estrategias retóricas y leer su obra más allá del estilo, ese manierismo. Nuestro autor, desde Hijos de la Medianoche, ha escrito un tipo particular de realismo, que podríamos llamar más bien mítico, pero es realismo, no se nos olvide. Si el mal llamado realismo mágico utilizaba la magia para el servicio de la verdad, como apunta Rushdie, él utiliza la mitología y la leyenda oral, aquí las 1001 noches, del mundo árabe para desequilibrar la falsa apariencia de lo real. Rushdie es claro en su propia búsqueda y nos dice: es porque la magia del realismo mágico tiene raíces profundas en lo real, porque emerge de lo real y lo ilumina, que importa. En esta su última novela, Rushdie se ha propuesto nuevamente iluminar ciertos aspectos de lo real que siempre le han preocupado. Lo imposible es verdadero en la obra de ambos autores. Y para empezar este diálogo, después de esta muy breve introducción a la novela, le preguntaría yo a Salman, en algunas entrevistas has hablado del regreso a la ficción con esta novela como un ejercicio liberador. pero también has cuestionado el carácter omnipresente de la no ficción y de la autoficción en las librerías y en el mercado editorial. Reivindicas la ficción, la imaginación, la tradición que llamaste el día que inauguramos el Salón Carlos Fuentes, la tradición Shandy, del Tristram Shandy. ¿Podrías abundar en ello, en el carácter fictivo de la ficción y en por qué hay que reivindicarla en un momento en el mundo en que la no ficción parece ser lo único que leemos y lo único que nos importa?
Yeah. Well, it's true, I think, that this is a moment at which people seem to almost distrust fiction, you know, because fiction isn't telling the truth. And so people feel skeptical about it, you know, and even, you know, like when you go to the movies, you so often see the title saying based upon a true story, as if that in some way validated the film. I mean, I suspect that when we all go and see the Star Wars movie, it's going to say based upon a true story. I think, you know, I think it's a matter of fashion, really. I think, you know, literature has fashion like everything else.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I was starting out, you know, when I was young, starting out in the late 70s, early 80s, there was the opposite fashion. That, you know, the readers were interested in writing that was very highly fictional and very unconventional. And people were bored of a kind of conventional realism at that time. And a lot of writers like myself benefited from that desire of readers to have something more unusual, you know. And now I think the pendulum has swung
To the others.
to the other side, and so you have, you know, Elena Ferrante and Karl Ove Knausgaard. And I'm not, you know, they're very fine writers. I'm not criticizing the work. I'm just saying that there is a mood at the moment towards that kind of very personal, very direct, almost non-fictional fiction. And this is the opposite. So I'm happy to say that I think I wrote a very unfashionable book. This is the anti-Ferrante.
Yeah.
But I think that the great thing about storytelling is the liberation it gives you to invent, you know. And but as you said in your introduction, if imagination is not anchored in truth, then it becomes unimportant because it becomes whimsical, you know. And if anything can happen, then nothing matters. You know? So, so the book has to be very well rooted in a certain vision of the world, and it has to also have great internal consistency. I mean, that's the great, you know, one of the reasons, for instance, why a book like The Lord of the Rings survives so well is because Tolkien worked so hard on creating the reality of the world, you know, that there's so much that is submerged, you know, that he knows so much more than he tells you, that the imagined world seems very authoritative, you know, and I think that's, you know, even if you're not writing about elves,
or
you know,
trolls. And
it's still important to be, to if you have a fantastic idea, that you must then be extremely serious and realistic about it. So, you know, in Kafka's Metamorphosis, for instance, you know, it begins with this random metamorphosis. With Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning to discover that he's transformed into a giant insect. And we are never told why, we are never told how. You know, it simply is so. And then the story is about how he has to deal with it and how the people around him have to deal with it. And at that point, the moment the metamorphosis has happened, everything else about the story is completely realistic. Completely
normal.
Realistic. Yeah, the way the family behaves is psychologically profound. And Gregor Samsa himself, you know, for instance, one of the sweet things about the story is that he tells himself constantly that this is only temporary.
Yeah.
That
it's just a condition. Yeah.
It's as if he's got flu.
Yeah.
And he's sure that he will be better soon.
Yeah.
You know, and so he clings to these very human feelings. You know, and it's because once that decision is taken to have the man turn into a beetle,
Yeah.
everything else is completely psychologically accurate and is true about human nature. And so, for instance, in this book, there's a surrealist event when this landscape gardener called Mr. Geronimo, yes, discovers that for unexplained reasons, he has levitated about this much off the ground. Now, of course, about 1 inch off the ground is as great a disruption of the law of gravity
Yeah.
as 20 feet, you know, so, but it's funnier, you know, so, and then I thought, okay, once I've, just like the Kafka story,
Yeah.
once I've taken the decision to do that, after that I have to be completely naturalistic. What would it be like for any of us to be 1 inch off the ground?
Yeah.
How would you drive a car if your foot was 1 inch away from the accelerator pedal? You know, how would you go to the bathroom if your bottom is 1 inch off the seat?
Yeah. You're always levitating.
You know, so the point is that once you've done the strange thing,
Yeah.
then you have to take it completely seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
It's whimsical, as you say.
otherwise it's nothing. You know, it's just a conceit.
Yeah.
To make it real, you have to think, what would it really like if that happened to me?
Yeah.
You know.
So
How would you?
I think also one of the questions that the readers ask always is, what are the origins of a novel? And probably
Yes.
that's a question that has already been asked to
I
you.
don't know. You know, the correct answer to this is that there's a store
Okay.
that you can go to,
Okay.
but I'm not allowed to tell you where it is.
Okay.
But we go there every so often. You know, if you take, like in any store, there are different kinds of stories available.
Yeah.
No, I mean the truth is, who knows where it comes from?
Yeah.
You know, in my case, the stories, the books very rarely arrive in one piece. You know, they arrive in fragments, and it's like having pieces of a puzzle without knowing what the shape of the puzzle is. You know, and gradually you find more pieces and things begin to fit together. You know, so it's like that. So with this book, for instance, the character of Mr. Geronimo and his levitation was really the first thing that I had. That was really, that's where the book began. And for a little while I thought maybe it would just be about him. Maybe just that story would be enough. This little Kafkaesque story, you know. But then the book gradually, then I had also this idea of Dunya, the fairy, the jinn princess, falling in love with the philosopher Ibn Rushd, Averroes. And I mean, to begin with, I wasn't even sure that they were parts of the same book. You know, I thought maybe these are separate stories. And so gradually I began to find the other bits of the puzzle to show how it all fitted together. And actually, in the case of this book, I did something that I don't very often do, which is I used a lot of improvisation. You know, where normally I'm quite architectural.
Yeah.
You know, I like to know the architecture of the book.
Of the book,
you know,
the structure.
But this time I thought, let's do the other thing, you know, which is just to sort of start and let it go and see where it goes.
Yeah.
You know, and so I did that for about the first year or so that I was writing the book. I was just trying things out. You know? And I mean, it's a very inefficient way of writing. You know, it's very wasteful.
Absolutely.
Because you can find yourself, you know, you've written 40 or 50 pages, and you think, you know, no.
It doesn't work at all.
Yeah, you think I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have to back away and then try and go down another direction. You know, etc. But I mean, it's interesting. It was because as I say, I've never done it quite so much before, and it was just another way to discover the story. And it took me about a year or more of doing that before I really had a clear sense of what the book was.
Of the internal architecture.
Yeah, of how the book, how it, because you know there are so many overlapping narratives in this book.
Yeah.
You know that just to see how it all fits together,
It's really difficult,
It's
yeah.
complicated. You know, because of course it's complicated because you want it not to feel complicated for the reader.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I mean, one, you know, for instance, there's a section in the novel where there are nested stories,
Yeah.
the Chinese
The
box
Chinese
stories,
boxes.
stories inside stories.
And they talk themselves. No?
And they, yeah, one of the things that really helped me was the movie of Pedro Almodovar called Talk to Her,
Yeah.
the bullfighter movie. You know, there's a moment in that where there's a story inside a story inside a story inside a story, and then there's a certain moment when all the stories end, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
like that. You know, and you're dragged up through 4 or 5 levels. But the thing about Almodovar's storytelling is it's so clear that you're never confused. You're never in any doubt about where you are, which level you're at, you know. And so I thought, well,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think it happens the same in the
Well,
novel.
I thought do it like that,
Yeah.
you know. But that question of making it very, that the reader should not be confused.
Yeah.
You know, the reader should know exactly what's going on and why.
So that takes me to another question about having fun as a
Yeah.
writer when you write a book like this,
Yeah.
and don't to not be afraid with entertainment
No. But
for
having,
the audience or for
but
the
having
reader.
fun can be dangerous for a writer. Because it's one thing for the writer to have fun, and it's another thing for the reader to have fun.
with
you
the
know?
same things.
And sometimes, you know, the writer has a great time, and the reader
Yeah.
thinks, you know, what? You know? And really, one of the strange things about this strange job is that sometimes work that is very, very difficult to do is very easy to read.
Yeah.
And work that is very easy to do is very,
very
difficult, to
difficult
read. You know, and so there appears not to be an exact correlation between what is happening to the writer and what is happening to the reader. You know, and I think in this case, as I say, there was about half the time that it took to write the book was just struggling with it, trying to see how it could work. You know, and then there's a moment when I did feel, okay, I kind of see now. You know, and then it became enjoyable. Then it did become enjoyable to write. Yes, because you know the thing that's enjoyable is when you finally find yourself writing pages that you're not embarrassed to show people. You know, embarrassment is the infallible test.
Yeah.
The infallible test.
Yeah.
If somebody says, "Can I see what you're doing?" and you go, "No, you
No.
know, it's not
I
ready
don't
yet," you know, then there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, of
There's
course.
something wrong. If you're ready to show it, that means it's probably close to finished.
Yeah.
You know? So
So at some point you discovered that all these stories had to do with this big battle between the evil
Yes.
and good.
yes, the jinn really, in the end, were the thing that provided the architecture
Okay.
of the book. Because when I was starting out with stories about young girls falling in love with philosophers and people levitating and so on, I actually hadn't thought about the jinn at that time. And then at a certain point, that idea showed up, and I thought, oh well, that gives the book the kind of big arc, you know, the big picture of the
Yeah.
book, into which all these other things can fit. And then actually one of the most enjoyable things was finding out about the jinn.
Yeah.
You know, because there are so many stories about them.
About genes.
Yeah, and actually not only in the Islamic world, you know. I mean, for instance, in India today, the jinn, the idea of the jinn is very alive.
Oh.
You know that if your car has a flat tire, you know, you could say, oh, jinn must have done it. You know, if you knock over a glass of wine, you can blame a jinn.
Blame the
you
jinn.
know? And there's actually in Delhi, there's this ruined building, sort of ruined temple called Firoz Shah Kotla, and every Thursday in the evening, people come with letters for the jinn.
Okay.
And they bring hundreds of letters every week with requests addressed to particular individual genies, you know, for various kinds of, and sometimes very small kinds of help, like, you know, dear so-and-so, my husband is a bastard. Can you arrange for him to fall over and hit his nose, but not too hard? You know? And literally hundreds of these letters are left every week for the jinn to. So you know this is not a myth that is dead. It's still a living idea. You know that they are amongst us making trouble. And then there's the question of sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are lots of stories about the jinn being very lecherous and inexhaustible, which is a bad combination.
They don't care about incest, for example.
No, they don't care about incest. The thing about incest, by the way, that I sort of made that up, that the jinn don't care about incest. But there is a species on Earth that doesn't care about incest, and that's these camels.
Oh yeah, you told me.
Camels don't care what they do, you know. Camels will have sex with their mother and produce a child which is both their son and their brother, you know. and they have absolutely no problem with it, you know. So this characteristic of camels I gave to the jinn. Actually, in my books, until this book, there's been very little in the way of sex. I think in The Moor's Last Sigh, there's one love scene, which is written about with incredible embarrassment, because it's the leading character, the character called the Moor, writing about the first time his parents made love, and you know, just to think about your parents having sex is of course humiliating. You know?
They're human beings.
Because your parents don't have sex. You know, it's impossible that your parents should have sex, so the scene is written as a kind of comic embarrassment, you know.
For the character.
I thought in this book also, I thought the key to writing about lots of sex is to make it funny. Sex as a comic device is quite successful. But when you try to sort of seriously write about sex, then you run into the danger of unintentional comedy. So intentional comedy is better.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
Lawrence Durrell told that to Henry Miller. Stop doing the same scenes one after another.
Yes, but Lawrence Durrell was very bad at writing about sex, and Henry Miller was very good at it.
Yeah. It was envy.
So it was envy.
It was
yes,
envy.
that's true. Because Lawrence Durrell wrote about everything with many adjectives. You know, very baroque, sort of rich, over-rich prose. And Henry Miller was just very simple, direct, you know, and the Lawrence Durrell way sort of didn't work, and the Henry Miller way, so that not good advice, or at least advice that I'm glad that Henry Miller didn't take.
Yeah,
you know,
the comic.
Yeah,
side.
but in my case, I don't know, I can't do the Henry Miller thing, and I don't want to do the Lawrence Durrell thing, and so the solution is comedy. And so the sex in the book is funny, I hope. Because it struck me when I was reading about the world of the jinn, you know, the way they live, not when they enter our world, but their own world, is that there really wasn't very much to do there. I mean, it's this paradise-like, you know, fairyland-like place, but there's, you know, there's no music, there's no movies to go and see, there's no internet, you know, there's all they can do is have sex. And they live for very long periods of time. And once you've had sex non-stop for like 300,000 years, you know, it gets a little dull. You know? And so their relationship with human beings is very ambiguous, because on the one hand, they're contemptuous of human beings, because we are these feeble creatures who live for half a second and can't do anything. But on the other hand, they're quite envious of human beings, because we have more interesting lives, because we do a lot of things other than have sex. You know, and actually most of us don't have sex very much at all. You know? but this leaves us lots of time to do other things, like create art and kill people, etc. So we're more interesting than them. You know?
And I think also one of the things that are really impressive about the book is the different styles, because when you're writing about the jinns or about past, like Ibn Rushd or Averroes, it's in another tone, very different when you're writing about Jimmy Kapoor and
because
graphic fiction.
Because what I'm trying to do is to bring together a kind of ancient, you know, fantastic world and a very contemporary, right now New York City, you know. So I wanted the book to feel very contemporary,
yeah.
contemporary, and to have in this contemporary world to have these old stories like thrown at it.
Yeah.
You know, throw the gin at the Chrysler Building and see what happens. You know, what happens is they turn into a giant snake and curl around it, or they go into the harbor and turn into a giant worm and come up and eat the Staten Island ferry.
Yeah.
Which, sorry, that happens.
That happens.
When the book was coming out in New York, one of the TV companies actually wanted to interview me on the Staten Island ferry because it gets eaten by the gin. So there we are in the middle of New York Harbor on this boat, with me saying, well, that's right over there is where
when it happens.
Yes, there's a moment in which you're relieved that fiction is just fiction.
Yeah. And you are also very fond of TV series. Probably you're even writing a TV series now. So
I'm not. No, it died.
But interested on
Yeah. No. I mean, it's a great lesson to have an experience of Hollywood. Yeah. How it goes in Hollywood is they come to you and they say, we admire you so much, and the thing we want most in the world, most in the universe, is for you to write something for us, and whatever you want to do, we will be pitifully grateful. And so you say, okay.
Let's do it.
And then you present them with an idea, and they say, this is so brilliant. This is a piece of genius of such colossal scale that we don't know how to react to this. And it is like nothing that anybody has ever thought of for television, and we are 1,000% excited. Yeah. Anyway, so this goes on, and you write various drafts of the thing. This goes on for 2 years, with them saying this kind of, you know, wow, are we impressed? And then after 2 years, they say, you know, we've decided not to go in this direction. And they never tell you why. Yeah. It's just, you know, no. It's like the Chinese Politburo, you know? Yeah. The reason,
you never know the reason.
There's no why. Yeah. There's no why. You know, the why is no is why. Yeah. You know, no, why is because we're not doing it. Yeah. You know? Because we've greenlit these other series over here. So anyway, it was educational.
Absolutely. But and graphic fiction. Do you read a lot of graphic fiction for Jimmy Kapoor?
I don't really. No, I mean, you know, I'm kind of aware of graphic novels, and some of them, you know, I mean, Neil Gaiman, for example, is a good friend of mine, and I really like the Sandman
series. Yeah.
And I like the kind of the revisiting of Batman in the kind of Dark Knight series, and then there are some which are much more naturalistic. You know, this is great graphic novel called Fun Home.
Oh yeah.
Which just came out, which has now become a big hit musical in New York, which is a lesbian novel, graphic novel, but it's incredibly powerful. Anyway, so yeah, some of them are good, you know. And I have this, I mean, Jimmy Kapoor, who is the character in the novel who wants to be a graphic novelist. I have this little theory that we're going to turn him into a graphic novel, because I suggested this to my publishers, to Random House. Because Random House, particularly Random House in the UK, publish a lot of graphic novels, and they have a lot of the best artists. You know. I said, how about this? I just had some sense about Jimmy Kapoor as a character at the end of the book. I felt that I wasn't finished with him in some way, you know, that he could have a further life. Yeah. And I thought if we talk to a graphic novelist and give him the character, just see what if he's interested, see where he would like to take the character, and maybe this character who in the novel dreams of making graphic novels could actually become a graphic novel.
Here on a trash
and would be sweet, you know? So anyway, we're thinking about it, might happen.
And how do you deal with so many characters and so many stories?
Well, I like it. You know, because one of the things I've always, from the beginning really, from Midnight's Children, I had this sense that if you're writing about a city, particularly if you're writing about a big city, one of the most obvious facts of the big city is the crowd. Yeah. You know, that you're always, your own life is always a life led in the middle of a crowd. You know, not like a life in a village, which is lived in what Garcia Marquez would call solitude. Yeah. You know? I remember there was this great joke of Carlos Fuentes
yeah.
where he said to me once, he said, you know, for Latin American writers now, it's very difficult to use the word solitude because everybody thinks you're making a reference to Gabon. And he said, I'm really afraid that soon we will not be able to use the phrase 100 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, in the city, solitude is a fantasy.
Yeah.
You know, the fact of the city is the crowd.
Yeah.
And so I asked myself from the beginning, but how do you represent that in a book? How do you represent the crowded nature of urban life? You know, and I thought the answer is that you deliberately overcrowd the narrative. You know, you deliberately put too many stories in, and sometimes you just pass by the story.
Yeah.
You know, you pass by and think, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, but we're going this way.
And it's something that Cervantes does or Loris Stern does
Well,
also.
I think that's
you
a,
can
you
leave
know,
a character somewhere in
Somewhere,
the...
over there, and maybe they have their own story,
Yeah.
you know, but we're not telling that story, you know, we're telling
We don't
this
need it
story.
here,
That it's a kind of deliberate wastefulness, you know, that you use up. I think one of the reasons I have not written that many short stories is because I keep throwing them away in the corners of the novels, you know, just to give this sense of cornucopia, you know, of kind of this big crowd of stories that your story that you're really telling has to sort of push its way through the crowd, you know, and sometimes interacts with the crowd and something in the crowd becomes a part of the story, and sometimes not. Sometimes you just pass by in the street and that it doesn't come back. But just that idea of the city being a crowd of stories, you know, is something which I mean, I did that in Midnight's Children and in a very different way in this book also.
And I was also very intrigued about the idea of not only good and evil, but also how some of the characters behave in both ways.
Yeah.
So
because
it's not always a novel with black and white characters, black and white life.
No, because that would be boring.
Very boring.
Because none of us are black and white.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, one of my favorite characters in the novel is this young woman who's kind of a gold digger. You know, she's sort of looking for a rich husband, and not doing so well. And then so first she becomes a murderer.
Yeah.
Because she murders one of her lovers, and then when we discover through the fairy princess Dunya, who is the main character really, that she is one of the descendants of the jinn, so she has a little bit of sort of magic inside her, and she is recruited in the battle against the dark jinn. You know, suddenly killing people, which is her special talent, becomes useful.
Yeah.
You know, because in a war, you need people who kill people, you know. And so suddenly she becomes a soldier and a kind of hero after being a murderer. And she's still both things, you know. I mean, she has a lot of darkness in her, but she becomes in a certain way heroic.
And also, because of that, the discussion of the big theme of the book between faith and reason is always...
it's also a little mixed up, you know, because this is why, one of the reasons why at the front of the book there is the famous picture of Goya.
Of Goya's.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters. That, you know, famous picture. But the thing that interested me is that the commentary that Goya makes about the picture is more complicated. He's not simply saying, you know, reason good, unreason bad. What he says in his commentary is that when these two things come together, when reason and fantasy are united, he says then they create miracles and they are the parents of the arts. You know, but when they are separated, you know, when the irrational is not in some way governed by the rational, that's when the monsters start showing up. So again, he's saying something more complicated than good and bad. You know, and I wanted that I thought that line of Goya's I thought really was the note that I wanted the book to hit.
Let's, if we can go a little bit far away from the novel, and you went, I think a month ago, to the inauguration of the archives of Gabriel Garcia Marquez at University of Austin at the Ransom Center.
Yes.
And you gave there some sense to the audience of your relationship with Latin American literature that will be also very interesting, I think, for the Mexican audience to hear how you started reading Latin American literature, if
Well,
in
I
some
start-
way
yeah.
it has been influential.
I was even when I was quite young, I started reading these books. There was a particular paperback series in America published by Avon Books, in which they began to publish a lot of the masterpieces of Latin American literature in English. And I mean, I think many of us who were reading in translation found these authors there first, you know, authors like Gabo, of course, and Carlos Fuentes, and Cortázar, and Asturias, and Machado de Assis, and you know, Carpentier, and Manuel Puig, and etc. But I found it a little bit, because when my first novel, the one before Midnight's Children, Grimus, came out, a friend of mine read it and said, "You've obviously been very influenced by Gabriel Garcia Marquez." I never heard the name. So I said, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Okay," he said, "you have to go to a bookstore now,
And buy it.
and you have to buy this book called 100 Years of Solitude." And I said, 100 years? Of solitude? I said, you know, that's a good book? And he said, "Don't be an asshole, go and do it." You know, so I went and did it, and of course, then it had the effect on me that it has on everybody, you know, just to draw you in, and then 100 years feels too short. Except for Borges.
Yeah.
Because Borges famously said
Yeah.
it should have been 50 years of solitude. But yeah, so I discovered, I mean, this was like 1975 or something, when I had
After your
when I
first
just
novel.
published my first novel. And then I started reading a lot of this stuff. And the thing that interested me was that in many ways, the worlds of these writers felt quite familiar to somebody with a South Asian background. You know, that I mean, so many of them would write I think what Carpentier called, everybody had to write their dictator novel, you know. So there's, you know, Reasons of State, and The Autumn of the Patriarch, and I, the Supreme, and, you know, so on and so on. And I thought, I know all these dictators.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, we've got exactly the same we've got the same people back home.
Yeah.
You know? So, and then I would read about, you know, the colonial issues and the great discrepancy between the world of religion and the world of not religion. You know, the
Secular.
superstition, the superstitious world and the secular world. I thought, these are all, I mean, I know about all this.
Yeah.
So I had this sense that I was reading about a familiar universe from the other side of the world, you know. And then, I mean, the first time I went to anywhere in this part of the world, in 1986, I went to Nicaragua in the middle of the Contra War to report, you know, on the Contra War. And I got there and I discovered, oh, it's actually true. All this, that's what you were saying about magic and realism. I was saying, this place really, it is as crazy as that.
Yeah.
You know? And that felt very comforting somehow.
Yeah.
I think I was telling you behind that there was one of the things you saw everywhere in Nicaragua, just drawn on walls. There was this graphic which was like an infinity sign, like this, and on top of it there was a volcano, sort of like this. And I asked people, I said, why is there an infinity sign and a volcano everywhere? And they said, no. They said, that is Sandino's hat. And Sandino's hat became this kind of symbol of the revolution. You know? There was no Sandino under the hat. There's just the hat. So that was enjoyable. I remember, you know, and of course they were very reluctant to let journalists go too close to the war area, you know. But anyway,
north.
yeah, in the north. Anyway, I managed to get onto a truck with a group of Sandinista soldiers, and we were going up this road, and then I remembered that I had read that 1 week previously there had been a school bus that had been blown up on this road because there had been landmine, you know, and a lot of children had been killed. And so I said to one of the soldiers in the truck, I said, "Is this that same road where the landmine was?" And he said, "Yeah, it's that road." So I said, "Is there any way of knowing if the road has been mined?" And he said, "Yes, there's a very big bag." So I thought, oh, great.
Okay.
And then this is me, you know, the least military, the least soldier-like person on earth. So we cross go around a bend in the road, and there's a tree across the road. And I thought, oh my God, we're dead. You know, it's an ambush, because that's exactly what you, as a novelist, you think, tree across the road, you know, contra soldiers, you're dead. But it just was a tree across the road. You know, the tree had fallen down the road. So we moved the tree, it went on. So it was, I mean, it was a very extraordinary experience, that. And it did show me that the reality that I had been reading about was actually present. It was actually there like that, you know. And then after that, have been able to travel more, you know. And I mean, I've been here in Mexico. I've been here quite a lot of times over the years, and Argentina and Chile and Colombia, so on. So yeah, but that was that first recognition that these worlds are similar.
Yeah.
You know, it's not so much influence as a kind of recognition of certain kind of fellowship of subject matter. You know, that we're writing about places which are similar, except they're on opposite sides of the world.
Yeah. So, after Latin American literature, we can talk a little bit about literary tradition.
Yeah.
And not only the West tradition, but also all the East tradition that you're bringing up into the book. How do you work with such rich
Well, I mean,
traditions
having rich traditions, that's the easy part. You know, it's when you don't have rich traditions that you have a problem.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the things that was, I mean, India, of course, it has a great literature in many languages. I mean, I'm not even talking about the great mythological literature. I'm talking about actual literature, not novels. You know, there are several Indian languages which have long literary traditions, and then there's also, of course, a still very vivid oral tradition in some parts of India, particularly in South India. There are these oral storytellers who, you know, will perform in front of literally thousands of people will come. And what I liked about listening to them was that they tell stories in a very non-linear way. You know, that there's the famous scene in Alice in Wonderland when the White Rabbit is giving evidence in court and is confused about how to tell the story. And the King of Hearts says to him, "Start at the beginning, go on until you reach the end, and then stop." and this is what we call classical form, right? You know, beginning, middle, end. And that's exactly how these people do not work. That what they have is 5 or 6 different narrative lines that they're juggling all the time. You know, so they will start, for instance, with something taken from Hindu mythology, some episode from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or something. And then they will immediately connect that to a recent political event that they want to criticize. And then they'll move from that to a story about their wicked great-uncle that everybody in the family hated and was just like that corrupt politician. And then they will do a little dance, and they'll sing a little song, and then they'll, you know, all these storylines will keep going. And you know, this is what you're not supposed to do, because you're told that the audience will be confused. You know, but actually, what happens is that's why the audience has a good time. You know, the audience is so much enjoying the act of this kind of juggling act, this kind of virtuoso performance. You know,
by the narrator.
By
the oral narrator.
That they enjoy it more because of the complication. You know, and I thought that's very interesting, and I thought, because after all, the oral form, the oral story, this ancient narrative form, is designed for one reason only, which is to keep the audience sitting there. You know, if the audience is not enjoying itself, it just gets up and walks away. You know, if it's really not enjoying itself, it throws things. You know, so however this form has developed, it's developed because they have discovered what it is that is most likely to keep the audience there having a good time. You know, and so I thought, how do you do that? How do you do that in writing? You know, I mean, you can't do it exactly the same way because a lot of the oral story is performance. You know, a lot of it is the actual charisma of the storyteller and the performer, and you don't have that on the page. But I thought, you know, let's see if there's a way of telling that kind of story in writing. So that was very helpful to me.
And in some points in the novel, you tell the reader that, or the narrator tells the reader that he doesn't know if this is exactly true. And that's also something that it's taken from tradition, because you're not the witness of the story, you're just retelling. How does retelling work in the novel for you?
Well, it allows you to blur the boundary between naturalism and mythology and fantasy. Because, you know, you can say that Dunya and Averroes, you know, she proved out to be extremely fertile. And so she had many, many broods of children. And in fact, on the last time it's reported that she had 19 children, but we can't be certain of this because the facts are hard to establish.
Exactly.
You know, because you say that, you could get away with saying that she had 19 children at one go. You know, and it's a comedy device. You know, it's an old comedy device. We can't be sure if there's any truth in the fact that so and so learned how to fly. You know, it just allows you to have somebody fly. You know, so.
And it's probably that takes us to the novel, not this novel in particular, but the novel as a genre, and how it's so alive, even with what you have described about non-fiction in the bookshelves. And I think even if it's not fashionable at this point, it will be.
No, it will be.
It's a trend, so
it
will be the real fashion.
The day after tomorrow, it'll be fashionable again. You know, it's these. I mean, readers have moods. Just like writers, so they're moody people. And, so their moods will change. You know? But I think the great thing about the novel is that it's so versatile, it's so flexible, that you can write great literature in the style of Elena Ferrante, and you can write great literature in the style of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So they don't exclude each other. You know, you don't have to have either or. You can have both. And in a different frame of mind, you can enjoy one or the other. You know, you can have Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. You know, you don't have to have one or the other. And so that's a big, you know, it's a big church, and that's one of the great attractions of it. And I mean, I was just interested. They've been, you know, next year is this big anniversary of Shakespeare and Cervantes, and there's a lot of people doing material for that, and I had to wrote an essay which will come out, but one of the things that it struck me that both of them, one of the gifts that they give to those of us who come after, is that they say to us that a story doesn't have to be just one thing. It can be many things at the same time. And if you just take, for example, Hamlet. You know, Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet is a ghost story, right? Soldiers on the ramparts, a ghost. Act 1, Scene 2 is political intrigue at court. Right? Act 1, Scene 3, Hamlet and Ophelia, is the beginning of a love story. And Act 1, Scene 4 is the ghost story again. You know, so you have a ghost story, a love story, a political story, and, you know, bits of comedy in there,
in between,
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, bits of comedy, and what Shakespeare shows you is that you don't have to choose. You don't have to just write a ghost story, or just write a love story, or just write a political story. You can write all three at the same time. The only problem is you have to be Shakespeare.
Or Cervantes.
Or Cervantes, exactly. But it's you see, if you contrast that with, for example, the classical French tradition,
Yeah.
if you contrast it with Corneille and Racine and Molière, you see that those in the French tradition, that mixture doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, if you're writing about, you know, Le Cid,
Yeah.
then you're just writing that kind of epic thing.
Epic, yeah, absolutely.
And if you're writing about Tartuffe, then you're just writing a
Comic.
comic thing. The idea of having Tartuffe and Le Cid in the same
the same,
play
yeah.
is not there in the French tradition. You know, so
Probably just Rabelais as a
yeah, just
as an
yes.
exception.
Rabelais is the exception.
Yeah,
Yes, as he is to most things.
Yeah.
But that the French tradition is more rigorously classicist.
Yeah.
You know, whereas the English tradition and the Spanish tradition has this flexibility. You know, to this more kind of game playing, absurdist, multiple possibility. You know, so it's not surprising that there is that. I mean, there's. The great French experience of surrealism really was in the visual arts, much more than in literature.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, there's some very good French surrealist
writers.
Boris Vian, you know, so on. But mostly, if you think of French surrealism, you think of artists,
Visual arts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to sum up this presentation, how was your stay in Mexico? You're leaving tomorrow, so
Yeah.
let's
Well,
go onto a personal side.
I've just been talking all the time.
Yeah. And we are delighted of hearing you all the time. So
No, but I mean, today I had a little chance to look around and explore the kind of downtown area of Guadalajara. That was great. Actually, I really enjoyed that because you know, I mean, 20 years ago, the city has changed hugely. You know, it's a much bigger city than it used to be, and actually, this festival is a much bigger festival than it used to be. And so, you know, I had to reacquaint myself a little bit, and so, yeah, I went downtown and had a look around, and that was great. Ate some very good food.
So let's hope that your next visit, we don't have to wait 10 or 20 years for your next visit.
I agree.
It has been for everyone. Ha sido para todos un gran placer. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Thank you. Thank you.